in the book of Acts, which was written by the Apostle Luke and can be thought of as Luke Part 2. Now, many signs and wonders were done regularly among the people by the hands of the apostles, and they were all together in Solomon's portico. None of the rest dared join them, but the people held them in high esteem. And more than ever, believers were added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women, so that even they carried out the sick into the streets and laid them on cots and mats, that as Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. The people also gathered from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing the sick and those afflicted with unclean spirits, and they were all healed. But the high priest rose up, and all who were with him, that is, the party of the Sadducees, and filled with jealousy, they arrested the apostles and put them in public prison. But during the night, an angel of the Lord appeared, opening the door of the prison, and brought them out and said, "Go and stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life." So this picks up with the apostles being out, traveling around Jerusalem, the surrounding towns, and preaching the gospel. And along with the preaching, miraculous healings were taking place, which makes perfect sense as they were continuing the work that Jesus was doing. Jesus was bringing the gospel, the good news of his being the Messiah, to the people of Israel. And then he was also physically healing them of various ailments. And the reason for this healing was not merely one of pity or making something right that was wrong. During the Old Covenant, blessing from God came in the form of things physical. So if you were living in a way that was pleasing to God, you'd be blessed with health, with financial benefit, with many children. There'd be peace in the land, and overall things would go well. And then the reverse was true, that if someone was living in a way that was unfaithful, they would suffer deprivation. There'd be war. There'd be attacks from the enemy. They would be they'd be sterile. No children be born to them. All these negative things would happen because God is always faithful to his covenant, which means that regardless of what we do as the other part of that covenant relationship, if we are unfaithful, God is not going to bless us, because to do so would be his being unfaithful to the covenant, which cannot be. If we are faithful, God will bless us. So the people around, hearing about the things that the apostles were doing and saying, would bring their sick out. In this case, it mentions that even with the hope that Peter's shadow might touch one of them, the idea being that even though he didn't physically touch them, if his shadow did, they would be healed. So again, this mentality of if we're living in a way we should, God's blessing will come in physical form. So with that going on, with that mentality still in place, the apostles continued on this path to work to establish Jesus as the Messiah, to get people to understand that no longer was this about being Jewish, no longer was it about being part of the Mosaic system. It was Christ has come, he has fulfilled the entire Old Covenant, and there's a transition going on where we're moving away from that Old Covenant way of thinking, Old Covenant way of doing things, and we're moving into being holy, loving your neighbor, and loving God. So the religious leaders around Jerusalem, of course, saw and heard what was going on, and in jealousy, they had the apostles arrested and put in prison. But God was not going to have that. He sent an angel to set them free and instructed them they need to go out and continue preaching. And because the apostles were moved by faith and moved by the understanding of who Jesus was and what God was doing through them, there was no need for concern because, for one, God had just released them from prison through an angel. So they did exactly what they were instructed to do. They went out, they continued preaching. And so they were in Jerusalem, and they moved into Samaria, which is a little bit further out, in Judea, which is even further out more, and then eventually into the ends of the known world, which included all around the Mediterranean, as far as Spain, up into Europe, eventually into India, down into Africa. So all these places, there was no stopping the gospel from growing. So this is why we need to understand that the gospel will continue to grow. The gospel will be successful, and we will see the world slowly turn and come to Christ, so that everyone from every nation will embrace him as Messiah. So there's no need for concern about Satan overthrowing, taking over the world again, because he's already been defeated. Christ completed his work, and he's given us the chore, the work of spreading the gospel, of Christianizing the world, and reaching out to everybody, no longer based on economic status, gender, or race.